Indian Express, 13th March, the editorial page. Aatmnirbharta is managing external dependencies, big power rivalries. Written by Sanjay Baru. The weaponization of India's oil imports by United States, linking the sourcing of oil to terms of bilateral trade, is a reminder of the constraints imposed by such external dependence on national security and foreign policy. Independent India began its development processes with four critical external dependencies: food, foreign exchange, defense equipment, and energy. The foreign exchange crisis of 1957 alerted policymakers to the external financial constraints. The war with China in 1962 signaled a shortage of defense equipment. The droughts of 1965 drew attention to the critical dependence on food imports. The Gulf War of 1990 contributed to a spike in oil prices that triggered a balance of payments crisis. The governments of the day learnt important economic and foreign policy lessons from each crisis. The shortcomings in defense equipment available during 1962 war forced Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru to reach out to the United States for assistance. The food crisis of the mid-60s showed how external dependence in a vital sector like food could also be used to shape foreign policy choices. President Lyndon Johnson tried to link food aid to change in India's stance on the war in Vietnam. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi stood her ground. The oil crisis of 1990 and the subsequent foreign exchange crisis of 91 forced India to approach the International Monetary Fund for support. Neither the United States nor other developed country economies were willing to help India until the government of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao undertook major changes in both economic and foreign policy. The diplomatic recognition of Israel was one consequence. More recently, the weaponization of finances by the Group of Seven economies following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the weaponization of energy supplies by US President Donald Trump draw attention to the constraints being imposed on the pursuit of an independent foreign policy and highlight the strategic importance of greater self-reliance. Little wonder then that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has rediscovered the relevance of Nehru's policy of self-reliance, that is aatmnirbharta, even as Panditji slammed day in and day out. It should be clear to the managers of national security that the US will persist with its present policy of weaponizing all forms of trade, especially trade in energy, defense equipment, and access to the advanced and critical technologies. The optimism generated by last February's joint statement titled US India Compact, catalyzing opportunities for military partnership compact, accelerated commerce and technology for the 21st century compact, should now be set aside given the events of the last 12 months. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump even signed on to another optimistic acronym, TRUST, US India transforming the relationship utilizing strategic technology, when they agreed that energy security is fundamental to the economic growth, social well-being, and technical innovation in both countries. Trump signed on a statement that promised to ensure energy affordability, reliability, and availability in stable energy markets. By reneging on the promise, Trump has undone a quarter century of trust building between the US and India. The trust statement says both countries are leading producers and consumers in driving the global energy landscape, committing them to an energy security partnership including in oil, gas, and civil nuclear energy. India can no longer trust Trump's America on energy security after the events of the last fortnight. Joining hands with Israel, the US has engulfed all of West Asia in a war that has serious consequences not just for India's energy security but also the larger economic interest it has invested in the region. Given the geo-economic stake India has acquired in the Gulf, the Israel-US action amounts to a betrayal of trust. The Prime Minister ought to stand up and say as much in Parliament. Indian national security managers would be well advised not to get locked into any more agreements with the US during the remainder of Trump administration, given the direction of Trump's economic and geopolitical policies. The Modi government's policy of aatmnirbharta requires it to stand up to the challenge of neo-imperialism posed by Trump's aggressive moves around the world. Self-reliance is earned, not granted. Even as India continues to manage these long-standing external dependencies in an increasingly uncertain and difficult global economic and geopolitical environment, new vulnerabilities have come to the fore. Over the past decade, elite immigration has emerged as a new source of external vulnerability. For a long time, India has viewed the diaspora's reach and standing, especially in developed countries and in West Asia, as a symbol of soft power and a source of foreign exchange. Trump's anti immigration and America First policies and the war in the Gulf have once again exposed the tenuous foundation of India's diaspora outreach. Moreover, a globalized Indian power elite is being used, especially by the US and its allies, to influence public opinion and shape policy narratives at home, drawing India into their conflicts. The last time this kind of external influence mongering was experienced on such scale was during the Cold War. In the 1960s and 70s, when a non-aligned India became an important theater for external actors. Once again, one sees a similar increase in the activities of what are these days fashionably referred to as influencers. The difference between the earlier Cold War era and now is the paradox that on the one hand India has become more developed and more influential, and yet on the other hand it appears to have become more vulnerable to external pressures and influence. While Prime Minister Modi seems to have adopted Indira Gandhi as his role model on a range of policy issues and in his style of prime ministerial governance, he has not yet acquired her sense of personal courage and confidence to stand up to such external bullying. Standing up Standing up to Pakistan is okay, but she stood up to the big powers. Managing big power rivalry, which in the contemporary era is a three-way contrast between the US, Russia, and China, while not allowing any one of them to exploit India's external strategic dependencies as weapons against India, is what leadership has to be about.